Hello, welcome back to the Road to Recovery podcast. I am one of your illustrious hosts, Ryan Mitchell Brown, here as always with my co-host with all the legit stuff that makes this podcast actually worthwhile, Tommy. And we're joined today by actually my mother, Lori, who's kindly sitting in the living room in another room from here so that we don't have the sound reverberating all over the place.
Social distancing as well.
Social distancing, yes, exactly. Especially because we just went to the store, so we got to be extra far away. But the purpose of this podcast was I thought it would be an interesting topic to talk about what it's like to be a parent of someone who has an eating disorder, because that is a totally different perspective than what me and Tommy are coming from, having lived through it and am currently dealing with kind of the after effects and the mental after effects of that. So Mom, I do want to thank you for coming on, because I want to say you were my first choice, but you weren't. So you just ended up being the easiest to get a hold of because we're stuck together. But I thought I wanted to ask you, when this was all going down, and I know it's been a number of years now, it was like 2015 when I was going through kind of the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, when I was beginning my struggles with anorexia and starting to noticeably lose weight. I'm curious, when this was kind of going on and you looked at me and I was just doing a lot of exercising and controlling my diet, were you aware of how restrictive I was becoming with my diet? Were you how much in the know do you think you were, like in the beginning of seeing me starting to do those behaviors?
I think in the beginning, I was not very aware of how restrictive your diet part was. You started to talk a lot about measuring your food. I became aware of that kind of a OCD thing that you have, and your exercising I obviously knew was getting out of control. That was probably the first key to me, was the over exercising. But at that time, I did not associate it with losing weight, because you've always been thin, right? So I didn't really think of that for you. And you're a man, and you typically think of it as a female disease, which obviously it's not.
And that's why I'm really thankful that Tommy kind of reached out to me about, and the work that he's been doing more so over the last couple of years, talking about this, especially from a male standpoint, because it's not talked about as much. So Tommy was actually the one that got me open to even talking about it at all online, really, because it's just not something that a lot of guys talk about. Tommy, because you're the way you manifested your eating disorder was actually at the loss. Part of it was from the loss of your mom. Was one of the triggers among a few. And so I was wondering if you had any questions you wanted to ask my mother as a parent.
Yeah, well, just like your mum's actually said there, when my dad was alive, when my eating disorder started with the loss of my mum, he was kind of the same. I was a professional footballer at the time, and I was believing that I was just getting fitter. I was taking my exercise up to 15 hours a day. My dad believed that it was just part of my, the grief and things like that, which obviously it was, but he seen it as that. And then I kept losing weight. He believed I actually had something like Crohn's disease or celiac disease. He was going back and forward to the doctor saying he was wanting all the tests done. He believed that's what it was. I did believe that there was something like that going on at one point, because I didn't really believe I had an eating disorder, because much like you're saying, I believed it was like a female illness. Right. And I believed I was just getting fitter and things. Yeah. And then it came to the point it was morphing, and I realised that I had an eating disorder, and then I believed that I had to hide it from everybody because I felt this kind of shame and things like that. So I can relate to that a lot.
I think it's I never really thought about what it must have been like from a parent's perspective until maybe a few months ago when we started doing the podcast, and I was just thinking about different ways people think about it, because I thought about it the same way you did, Tommy, where I thought the entire time I was merely just trying to take control of my life that felt out of control during that time. And I figured that I was just getting stronger. But even when I noticeably got weaker, then that fear ramps in of like, now I know I'm underweight. Partially the fear is like gaining that weight back and it just being fat, which is something that I think a lot of people fear. But I was going to ask, so Mom, when I guess it was noticeable, and I was at this down point, and you talked about, me and you have talked about you reaching out to some other family members about this. Like you talked to my aunt, your sister Kelly,
Right.
about this a few times. What were those conversations like, if I can ask? Because from a parent, I'm assuming you probably didn't know how to handle that behavior, and because I was in such a state of denial,
Yeah.
how to handle it without me just getting angry and then restricting more.
Yeah, and I really didn't reach out to anybody in the family really for quite a while because I didn't know what was going on, or I didn't know how to talk about it, I guess. Dad and I talked about it, of course, a lot. And really, part of it was when you were a boy to the age that you were were you 18,
I was
19?
18, yeah.
So, I mean, I don't see you naked. So I could see your face, obviously, thinning out, but I couldn't see the extent of the damage to the rest of you because I don't see you. And you were going through a breakup before that kind of catapulted you into wanting to improve yourself and distract. And so I thought, okay, he's exercising. That's a positive thing. He's trying to eat healthy. I mean, the things that you were talking about to me seemed on the surface like a good thing going on. So it was quite a while till I talked to your aunt, to Kelly. She was the first person actually I reached out to after I had talked to you enough that I got you to consent to go to a doctor with me.
Mm-hmm.
Then she, living in California, having a lot of pretty people around her in that area, was really familiar with it from especially female perspective of that. And she was super supportive. And her first thoughts were, what are you doing for you? Meaning for me, to help you. And so that was really good. The hardest one to talk to, I think, were Grandma and Grandpa, because they just didn't understand it. They didn't know how that.
And even when I talk to them now, they still don't understand it, which it's one of those things that you can't really understand unless you've been in it or been around someone that has it a lot, I think. But but that does bring up kind of an interesting point about Kelly asking you, how were you taking care of yourself? What things did you do, especially in those moments where you knew I was not making any progress? You were literally doing everything for me. Like you got me a nutritionist, you got me a therapist. We went to see my useless doctor, who I still think is useless. I was doing all of those things. I was doing all of those things, and I was in denial throughout all of them. I was getting nowhere. So what were you doing for yourself to help keep yourself mentally, I guess, as mentally okay as you can be, like seeing your son?
Sane.
Yeah. But what were you doing?
Faking it. I'm a teacher, so I can act really well. I can compartmentalize everything. When I was at school, I was doing what I had to do to get through the day. I think about it in the car. Dad and I talked about it a ton. I did a lot of journaling, actually, to start just getting out, because I didn't really know who to talk to. I looked up like support groups, but there weren't really any that weren't religious based around here where we live. And I'm just a spiritual. I'm not,
a lot of them are LDS. We live in Utah, so
right, Mormon, and I'm not. So I mean, I didn't really feel comfortable trying to go to there. So a lot of it was just in the beginning was that kind of thing, and then after a point, I did talk to Kelly quite a bit.
So Tommy, because you have some eating disorder recovery, you have certification, and you have all this knowledge. You help counsel, doing like online counseling and stuff like that. And you've been doing that for a while. What have you ever conversed with parents that are, or is it usually straight on the person dealing with the issue?
It's only really the last round about 2 years that we've actually started to look at working with carers and obviously parents and like partners and things like that. So now they have a dedicated group, and it's which is BEAD in the UK. They have like a dedicated group on a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Friday, which is dedicated to carers and things like that. So obviously we look at the kind of social dynamic, the way it kind of affects like parents and things like that, because it's not just about the person that's got the eating disorder, it affects the whole kind of family and things. So we started doing a lot of that, and seems to help quite a bit, because like your mum's just spoke about there, that you don't know what to say is the right thing or what you're saying is the wrong thing, and that's really, really hard to kind of work around that as well.
Mm-hmm. So in what you have seen doing that, if there's like a parent of this watching, they have a child that's going through this and they're not in a stage where the person dealing with the eating disorder is ready and having the willingness to start taking those first steps, what would you say to like someone like my mom who was in that situation, didn't know what to do, basically was faking it to get through the day? What would you say they could do to try and nudge that person forward, or any of that? How did we lose them?
Well, I think a lot of the hard part for me, it was that you were so worried about what you were eating that the instant you ate it, it would convert to fat no matter what it was, that you'd exercise, and to get you to the point to take you to the doctor, even though, like you said, you don't trust him or whatever. It was a step, because after the nutritionist recommended we go do that, and we did get you on something to help the rabbit wheel kind of stop going in your head. That medication for that period of time was necessary. And it did really help you begin to recognize there's an issue.
Right. And Tommy obviously just glitched out, so hopefully I'll be able to get him back in here in a second. But I guess for you, was the hardest part not knowing what was going on entirely, or was the hardest part being able to talk to me about it and not knowing how I would react? Or was it something other than that?
I think it was a couple of those things. I think talking to you and getting you to recognize there was an issue was paramount, because until you were willing to recognize that and help yourself, there was literally nothing that I could do for you. You were 18. You could have left. You know what would I think I got to the point where we were like, okay, your organs are going to shut down, and I will have to hospitalize you, and I will do that for you.
And I think
at that point is when you finally said, okay, I'll go see somebody.
Yeah, I think that was kind of my turning point as far as realizing the severity of what was going on. But it's just crazy, because even now, so I've been dealing with a chronic illness, small fiber neuropathy, as a complication due to my years of anorexic behavior. And I went through the same exact steps of like denial to like grief and all these things. So during this time, it was probably a very similar pattern for you for what you had to do. You had to compartmentalize your mind. You had to do your day to day and deal with me like at night.
Get through it.
And get through it. And at the end of the day, it's one of those things where it all comes down to that person's willingness to be able to change, I think. Because unless you're willing to change, there's not much you can do. I do want to ask, because Dad isn't here, we're going to have to ask as a third party observer. Tommy is back. Thank goodness. We were
that never usually happens.
Trying to come back.
We had a lovely freeze face of you for about 2 seconds. It was great. I hope someone memes it up. But I was just about to ask my mom here, because my dad isn't here, I can't ask him, what was your observation of his thoughts going on? Because me and him are very like, we both have OCD tendencies and all these things. So someone that has, in a way, a similar problem, what was he noticeably doing or lack thereof doing?
I think he really didn't know what to do. I think we talked to each other, but the timing of it all, he was going through some new stuff at work. We were in a fairly new state, even though we'd been here for a little bit. And I hid to some extent the things that were going on and tried to just deal with you, because I could deal with you calmly, and he would just freak out or get mad, and it didn't help. So I would try to talk to him kind of separately and coach him. Here's how you say this. and then let him, approach you too. Because I think, honestly, with the background that he has, like you're saying, he's OCD as well. His parents did not talk about anything to do with health or family or mental wellness in any kind. That you just don't even talk about that. So his ability to do so was really compromised. So I think I, as an educator, at least had those tools to help him be able to better talk to you in a calm manner, and so that we could both be saying the same thing, that we were on the same page and sending you the exact same message. That's really important.
So Tommy, right before you had that amazing freeze frame, right before that, I was asking you if you were talking to a parent who has a child dealing with this issue, or maybe it's their significant other, how would you kind of approach helping them being able to help whoever's dealing with this kind of thing?
Yeah, like I was saying, basically what we always recommend is that they don't focus on the food and things like that or the body image. They try and just be there for them and encourage them to focus upon the positive side of things, because the food isn't really, though it's part of the issue, it's not actually the thing that's causing the eating disorder. It's the external things that's going on. So you just being there for them and try to encourage them, get them to open up if you can. Obviously, the main protocol is going to your GP, but that is obviously hard when you've got an eating disorder, because you don't want to obviously face that. But that's kind of what they recommend, is like you try and obviously just be there for them, get them to open up to anybody that they can open up to.
Right. And I actually wanted to ask you this. There's something my dad does a lot now is like, and Mom, you'll know, is like when we're talking, we're like having dinner or whatever, he'll mention something about me eating that food and eating a lot of it and being fine. And that kind of subtly triggers me for some reason, just because I'm not eating that. And of course, at this point, I'm doing things differently for a completely different reason other than ED recovery, because I have a neurological issue. But at the same time, when that goes on, is there a way, I would like to know, for people that are working on their recovery and they're at a point where they've brought back sustainable weight, Tommy, kind of where I am. I'm not like deathly, skeletal or anything, but I'm still working on, putting on some mass and like getting to that set point weight. For people that are right there and they still have like these minor moments of being triggered from statements, what statements do you think parents should stay away from when talking about food around their child with that, when they're still like, they're getting to a good point, but they're still not normal because it's a long transitional phase? And we may have just lost him again. This is just one of those days, people. I'm telling you, it's a rough.
Well,
cut.
I was going to say to you, I think it's important for the person going through the eating disorder, you have to tell the people that you're with what is the trigger, because I think if you have not told like Dad that, he has no idea.
Right.
I mean, I think he's pretty clueless that is something that triggers you and makes it even harder for you to do what you're trying to do, which is maintain and stay in recovery and get healthy.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing. I guess for you, were there moments when you in this time of you just not knowing what to do, were there moments when you would just kind of break down or any of that, or did you feel pretty controlled over yourself emotionally?
Oh no, I totally broke down probably every night. I just didn't do it in front of you.
Right.
I mean, I'd go into my bedroom, into the bathroom with the fan on so no one could hear me.
Right.
Because that didn't serve any purpose for me to release. It wouldn't help you. Although I did get emotional in front of you. I would cry in front of you and say, this is really, what we need to do. You've got to face this. Something is going on. I'm here for you. I mean, we have very emotional talks a lot with each other. But yeah, I separately broke down a ton. I don't know how you can't.
Yeah, I mean, I broke down all the time, and especially like we earlier, Tommy, when you were frozen, we were discussing how over the last several months when I was dealing with my chronic illness, it was really like the same pattern again, as far as you going through like denial phase, like grief phase, and then wanting to end
Right.
it phase and all this stuff. And
Absolutely.
it was really just a rehash of the whole anorexia thing all over again, just in a shortened span. But before you cut out, I was asking you about what you would say to a parent that's trying to, what are some like trigger phrases to kind of be aware of when you're around someone like that, that's your child or your significant other?
Yeah, well, like I say, it's
Dang, every time.
very different.
Oh man, this is just one of those days.
Love technology when it works.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I guess, honestly, this will just be the crux of the show, is we may never know what Tommy is going to say. And, I mean, he's checking out something like that. I'm going to remove him from the stream. But it's really fascinating to me, I guess.
There's some lagging going on.
Yeah, I think it's because we're all using the Wi-Fi at the same time. But it is really fascinating for me as kind of the person that's gone through it, talking to you about it, and then talking about things that still trigger me. And I guess now it's less that I'm worried of what's going on. But at this point, I'm really just rambling because Tommy's back. So how's it going, Tommy?
Okay.
Yeah, what I was going to say is it's very different for different people. Obviously, for myself especially, it was just focusing upon, like, sometimes my dad would say something like, "You're looking really, really healthy." And for somebody that's got an eating disorder, they obviously interpret that right away as I look fat. So I think it's about focusing on everything apart from the body image. I think just focusing upon maybe something that you've achieved in that day. Maybe you've done some kind of writing or something, how good you've done that day. I think that's important. Focusing upon external things rather than obviously the body image.
Right. And I think that's really important. And this is something we talked about in our last podcast when we talked about COVID-19 and having OCD and an eating disorder during this time, when your mind can get all refocused on those things that you couldn't focus on before because you were keeping busy. We mentioned that keeping busy is very, very important to being able to recover, because it allows you to not suck yourself back into those behaviors. And I think when I talk to people about this and they tell me that they're getting into some more like depression or dealing with these struggles again, it's because they've had this, they've suddenly become not keeping themselves busy. They've given themselves the time to allow themselves to think about all these worries. So when you realize that, that's the time when you start to have these thoughts, that's when you realize you need to start doing something else, because the busier you can keep your mind occupied on other things, which for me at the time when I was coming out of anorexia, I just began doing YouTube again after several years. And so that was kind of my distraction while I was in recovery, was making comedy videos on my other YouTube channel. And so that was kind of my way of getting out of it. So I think that a big key, and Tommy has stressed this a lot, is that you need to find something that you can be, whether it's a passion or something that you can put a lot of time and focus in, away from any food or any food related thing, because that's going to help you more in your recovery than just focusing on the food aspect. Because if you just focus on the food aspect, you're just going to be a healthy weight person who's obsessed with food.
Right.
And that happens a lot. It's what the term is quasi recovery.
Yeah. And that's something that we wanted to talk about more in depth into in a future podcast. We've done it kind of on and off in some past podcasts, and we've done it with some other guests like Ethan. But it's really fascinating, because even now I find myself in a unique position where I'm in this quasi recovery phase, and everything I do, I don't really worry about food too much. I'm only making sure whatever I'm doing food-wise is supporting my healing from my nervous system problem, which I think is a decent middle ground to be in. But I do have to watch it, because there are moments where I get caught up in the food that I'm eating and like the control aspect of like the amounts. So when that happens, I let loose of that a little bit, and then I kind of force myself to actually eat more of what I'm doing. Because one thing that Ethan mentioned in our podcast was a good thing, is that when you start getting these restrictive thoughts, to do something unrestrictive. For me, I can't just go and like eat a candy bar because it hurts a little bit after physically, like it hurts. but what I do is whatever I'm eating that day, I'll force myself to eat more of it than I had planned or whatever. And so now my next step from this is, as I work on this part of my recovery, is being able to step back from having to know any amount and just know that, like, as long as I'm throwing it in there, then that's like all you got to do. You don't have to know if it's whatever gram or anything like that. Cause I think that's kind of a dangerous mindset. And then it goes back to
that's eating disorder again, using numbers, because that's what the eating disorder thrives on. Whether it's calories, whether it's amount of food, whether it's your body weight, whether it's how many steps you take each day, that's what the eating disorder thrives on. It will use anything that it can to do that.
Yeah. And so, Mom, when we were, this was 2015, we went to England, and this was during my part of my recovery. I'd gotten back up to about 100, 105, 10 pounds. And we went to England, where I had removed all the control over all the food I had that I was getting used to, what I was gaining weight on. And we went there. Did you notice any behaviors while we were out in London where I began to restrict again? I wonder if she's frozen.
So the trip, talking about the trip when it first started.
Yeah, in 2015.
Okay, sorry, it was lagging a little. Exactly. So you were doing, yeah. So were fully aware, like we were entrenched in figuring out what to do for you. You were not at that point admitting this was a huge problem. You were very limited on what food you would. And so at that point, because of the situation of having had the tickets, I really felt like Dad had to see his family. This was after his parents had both passed away. This was the only family he had were in the UK, and they are getting older. And I thought, okay, I don't know if it's going to get significantly worse to go there and do this trip or stay here and make it better at that point. Because like I said, at that point, you were really not admitting it yet fully. So we went ahead and we packed a ton of food that you did eat, and I would just try to force that on you wherever we were there. I mean, it was still a good trip in many ways, but I mean, looking back, yeah, that was totally, had no control. This whole thing is about what you could control. That totally threw that out the window. So you had no control of where we were going to eat, what food we could find there, your ability to cook it or whatever. I mean, our situation was really hard. We made sure we stayed at a place where you could get a big breakfast and take stuff with you that you would eat. Mm-hmm. That was a bonus.
See, the problem.
Other than that, I don't know if that would have been the best thing to have done at the time, or if we should have just, like you and I stayed home, kind of. I don't know. It's one of those things where we're like we're not fully willing to admit a problem. So I don't know if it really made a difference in the trip, except it made it harder because it gave you even less control that you already had.
Yeah, I mean, in retrospect, I kind of think it was a bad decision for me to go, just because I ended up. I mean, it was. I'm all about challenging yourself during recovery. I think that's how you grow. But I was clearly not at a point to take a leap where we went somewhere for 2 weeks, because what I ended up doing was I ate breakfast, like I just did like English breakfast, like the big breakfast. And then I basically didn't eat the rest of the day. And then we walked 10 miles. So it was a big mistake. I lost 20 pounds in like 2.5 weeks. So in a big way, it was a huge mistake. So I guess when it comes to challenging, like doing challenges on yourself and like doing that, Tommy, do you have any advice for any of that? I mean, I'm sure he's frozen right now because I can't tell. But I think when it comes to challenging yourself in an eating disorder, you really got to take into account where you're at in recovery and whether or not you're able to make that leap. Whereas we were kind of in this quasi-recovery phase, and I don't think I personally was ready to go somewhere I had never been before, had no idea of what was around. And I just don't think I was ready to take that kind of crazy leap at the time. But we did go back to London this last summer, and I was totally fine. In fact, I actually challenged myself to eat at whatever restaurant you guys wanted to go to. I didn't. You would ask me like, where do you want to eat?
Totally different
You
experience.
asked me, where do you want me to eat? Because it's safe. And I would tell you, you need to choose, because if I choose, I'm going to be letting my eating disorder choose where I'm eating. And I think that's something to put out there too, is that if you're a parent out there and you're dealing with this and you are trying to accommodate them, there is a level of accommodation that I think is good for that patient. And then there's a level, and this is just my offhand experience, this is not medical advice. I think that a better challenge would be to get them uncomfortable to some extent, but just in little bits and pieces, because if you go too much, then it's just not, it's not gonna get to anywhere. So we're kind of reaching a point where I'm kind of running out of questions for you, Mom. Are there any lasting thoughts about where you think I'm at now versus where we've come from? What do you see now behavior-wise?
I think it's still really a day-to-day thought in your head that you deal with. But I think you're able to say, oh, that's anorexia, I'm not going there, and move on with your, before you couldn't stop that. I always say it as a habit gerbil wheel running around and around and around in your head. I don't think you have that now. Like you're able to, you still have to be very scheduled, like when you're going to eat because you're trying to get enough calories. And so, I mean, I think scheduling, and that's part of your OCD issue. But for me, I'd rather have that, and you have a schedule that you can work with and have a healthy variety of foods and get your day in a pretty positive way and feel about yourself, is a hugely different place than you were in back then in 2015. I mean, there's just no comparison.
Tommy, do you have any questions kind of going along lines with any of this stuff?
Yeah, what I was going to ask, did Ryan change a lot as in his personality? Because for me personally, I basically turned against my father quite a lot. I was lashing out at those I loved, basically because they were trying to help me, and my eating disorder had basically took over me, and I felt as if they were trying to put me into the hospital. They were only caring about making me fat and things like that. Was that anything that you kind of experienced at all?
Do you get that, Ma? Ma?
I can't hear.
Geez, Ma, you're screwing this up for me. My big moment. Can you hear me now? You probably should have just gone on LTE because our Wi-Fi is bupkis.
I would say, should I go ahead and I'll say my last thought and leave, and then let you guys finish up?
Sure. I can answer that question for you, Tommy.
Because I couldn't hear his question.
Tommy, the answer to that question is, yeah, I lashed out at everybody around me. In fact, the last like 8 months, about 7 months ago, when this started going on again with my nerve stuff, it was the same story. I was just getting pissed at everyone. I still had moments even up to a month ago or a month or two ago where I would yell at you and Dad saying that you are not helping me. You don't care about me. All you're doing is wasting time. I'm running out of all this stuff. So I think that's, and I think a lot of that can be attributed, especially when you're in the midst of an eating disorder. Some of that can be attributed to the lack of nutrient content you have going on in your body. Your hormones are just like everywhere.
I was exactly the same, like I say, with my dad. I was lashing out at my dad all the time. It wasn't until he actually walked out the hospital and he turned around to him and he said, look, until you actually change and you want to get better, I'm not coming back in to see you. And he didn't do it for around about 5 or 6 weeks. And I was constantly on the phone, Dad, please come in and see me. And I knew that I had to get better at that point, and that was my first recovery. So for that did make a big difference for me, because I was just lashing out at everybody that I loved, because I believed that they were just wanting to harm me and put me into hospital and make me fat and things like that.
Yeah. So I guess, Tommy, let's kind of round out this podcast just because we've had so many weird glitchy things. And I think that's my Wi-Fi.
These things happen.
Yeah. But I did want to have you kind of end it out here. And I wanted to ask you one final question, Tommy. For any parent that is out there watching, and for you, Mom, watching this right now, what are some telltale signs for the parent to look out for that, for their child, that they're kind of seeing this behavior going on? What are some things they should look out for to kind of start taking action on?
Well, obviously the first sign usually is that they're losing weight, but that isn't always the sign, because obviously you've got bulimia and things like that. For all intensive purposes, people can look really, really healthy and still have an eating disorder. But usually it's over-exercise is one of them. Usually been very, very secretive around food. Obviously having food in their bedroom or going to the toilet after they have their meals. Obviously saying that they've obviously had something to eat when they've been out and about, or they're trying to kind of skip meals. These are all the kind of signs that you would kind of really look for. That's kind of telltale usual signs of an eating disorder.
Well, I really do appreciate, Mom, you being able to talk about this, because I know it can't necessarily be easy for you to do so.
Definitely.
At this point, I don't know
Thanks
if you
very
can,
much.
I don't know if you can even hear me at this point. I don't know if anyone hears me. I know Tommy does.
I
can hear you.
But I just want to say thank you for coming on. And for any of you guys out there, be sure to let us know any types of topics or suggestions you would like to see. Leave them in the comments down below. Subscribe to the channel for more. I'd love to just get any thoughts that you might have that we have not covered, talked about, because
absolutely
we have the experience. Tommy has some ED recovery coaching experience and etc. So please leave those comments down below. Find us on Facebook, hit us up, let us know your thoughts, and we'll see y'all in the next one.
Thanks a lot.